You won't believe what Karen did this time. I live in a neighborhood managed by a homeowners association, or HOA for short. If you've ever heard of HOAs, you probably know they come with a mountain of drama, endless meetings, and the strangest rules you can imagine. Our community is no different. Every week seems to bring a new controversy, a new heated email thread, or another neighborly squabble over something ridiculous. And right at the center of all that chaos is Karen, our nightmare neighbor. Karen has somehow appointed herself as the unofficial enforcer of every HOA guideline, both real and imagined. She watches the neighborhood like a hawk, waiting for the smallest infraction to swoop down on. Too many weeds in your garden? Karen will take a picture and send it to the HOA board. Fence an inch too tall? Expect a warning letter courtesy of Karen. Painting your front door a slightly non-traditional shade of blue? She'll call an emergency meeting about it. Karen is the kind of neighbor who makes you double-check your trash can placement every Sunday night. She thrives on control, fueled by a deep need to micromanage everything and everyone around her, and this time she definitely crossed the line. Just a few blocks from where I live, a young couple bought a small piece of land on the edge of our neighborhood and decided to start a mini farm. It wasn't anything too big or commercial, it was charming and simple. They planted rows of vegetables, from juicy tomatoes to crisp green beans, and kept a handful of animals like chickens, a few goats, and even a friendly old donkey that the kids adored. On weekends, they would occasionally open their gates, allowing neighbors to walk through, buy fresh produce, and let their children interact with the animals. It became a favorite local spot almost overnight. People loved the idea of having farm-fresh vegetables and eggs without needing to drive to the countryside. Gave our suburban neighborhood a kind of rustic, wholesome feeling that brought people together in a way that barbecues and block parties never quite managed to do. However, not everyone was thrilled. To no one's surprise, Karen saw the farm not as a charming addition to our community, but as a blatant violation of everything she believed the HOA stood for. In Karen's mind, the farm represented chaos, a lack of control, and an open door to property value collapse. She began her campaign almost immediately after the first open gate event. First, she sent letters, not just to the HOA board but also directly to the farm owners. These letters were filled with formal language, citing imaginary rules and expressing grave concerns about unsanitary conditions and potential disturbances to the peace and aesthetic value of our neighborhood. When the letters didn't result in the immediate shutdown she had hoped for, Karen escalated. She started taking pictures, sneaking around the farm's fence line with her phone, snapping photos of anything she could twist into evidence. A goat laying in the sun, a group of kids laughing a little too loudly, a compost pile neatly tucked behind the barn. It was almost impressive, the level of dedication Karen showed. She meticulously documented everything, creating thick folders of printed-out photos, annotated with red circles and dramatic underlining, as if she were gathering evidence for a high-stakes court case. Of course, none of her evidence showed anything remotely illegal or dangerous. Still, it wasn't enough for Karen to stew in her frustration alone. She wanted action. She needed a spectacle. And so, one particularly sunny Saturday afternoon, she made her boldest move yet. She called the police. Karen reported the farm, claiming it was a public health hazard and a source of community unrest. According to her, the animals were roaming freely, there were foul odors polluting the air, and the noise from the visitors was unbearable. To add more drama, she warned that the farm could become a breeding ground for disease. Her voice must have been dripping with righteous indignation as she made that call, imagining, no doubt, a fleet of squad cars descending on the farm, sirens wailing, to shut it down in dramatic fashion. When the police arrived, it wasn't quite the movie scene Karen probably had pictured. Two calm officers pulled up, had a brief chat with the farm owners, and began a routine inspection. They checked the animals, all of whom were healthy and contained. They inspected the produce area, noted the cleanliness, and reviewed the paperwork. To Karen's visible horror, everything was in perfect order. Couple had all the necessary permits and certifications. Their small farm operation was not only fully legal, but also supported by local government initiatives to promote sustainable, community-based agriculture. In fact, the officers mentioned that they had heard positive things about the farm at the last town meeting. Karen, standing across the street with her arms folded and a smug expression slowly morphing into a scowl, couldn't believe it. She tried to intervene, crossing the street in a huff and loudly presenting her printed photos and her typed complaints. The officers politely listened, flipping through her evidence with the kind of neutral expression people reserve for hearing conspiracy theories about the moon landing. When she realized they weren't taking immediate action against the farm, Karen's tone shifted from concerned citizen to aggressive complainer. She accused the officers of negligence, of endangering the neighborhood, and of siding with rule breakers. Her voice grew louder, her gestures wilder, until she was practically shouting in the middle of the street. A few neighbors had come out to watch the spectacle by this point, phones discreetly recording from porches and behind bushes. It was impossible not to notice the irony. Karen, in her quest to preserve peace and order, had become the very source of disturbance she claimed to despise. One of the officers finally asked Karen to lower her voice, reminding her that creating a public disturbance could itself be grounds for citation. Karen scoffed, rolled her eyes, and muttered under her breath about corruption and lawlessness. In the end, the officers left after congratulating the farm owners on their well-run operation. Karen, red-faced and fuming, stomped back to her house. The neighbors who had been quietly watching dispersed, many of them exchanging grins and knowing glances. The farm continued its operations as usual, now with even more support from the community, who admired the young couple's resilience and appreciated the fresh produce and family-friendly environment they had created. Karen's defeat was complete, but true to form, she didn't apologize or acknowledge her mistake. Instead, she grew noticeably quieter in the following weeks, her usual barrage of complaints to the HOA slowing to a trickle. It seemed that even Karen had limits to how much public humiliation she could endure. Meanwhile, the farm thrived more than ever, often selling out their goods within hours. Local media even picked up the story, framing it as a heartwarming example of urban agriculture bringing a community together, complete with photos of happy kids petting goats and smiling parents carrying baskets of fresh vegetables. Karen, of course, was not mentioned in the article. Her crusade had backfired spectacularly, leaving her isolated and increasingly irrelevant. The farm owners, on the other hand, became minor celebrities in the neighborhood. People stopped by not just to buy vegetables but to show their support, a small but powerful stand against the kind of petty authoritarianism Karen represented. In the end, the community chose kindness, cooperation, and fresh tomatoes over fear and control, and it was a beautiful thing to witness. When the police finished their inspection and calmly told everyone that the farm was entirely legal and operating within all local and HOA guidelines, Karen absolutely lost it. Her face turned an alarming shade of red as she started yelling right there in the middle of the street. She accused the officers of being incompetent, of taking bribes, and of betraying the neighborhood. She waved her arms dramatically, her voice carrying across the quiet suburban streets, drawing even more neighbors out of their houses. What had started as a few curious onlookers quickly turned into a full-blown audience. People stood on their lawns, some recording on their phones, others just staring, a mixture of amusement and disbelief on their faces. The officers, clearly experienced with handling much bigger dramas than an angry suburban lady, remained calm and professional. They asked Karen several times to lower her voice and step back. Instead, she doubled down, marching right up to one of them, pointing her finger in his face and demanding that they shut down the farm immediately. That's when things really took a turn. One of the officers informed Karen, in a steady voice that carried a note of final warning, that her behavior was now bordering on disorderly conduct. When she continued shouting even louder, he had no choice but to write her up. In front of the entire neighborhood, Karen was issued a citation for causing a public disturbance and for making a false report. You could practically hear a pin drop as the officer explained that filing a false complaint was a serious matter and that her accusations, being completely unfounded, had wasted police time and resources. Karen tried to argue, sputtering about her rights and duty to protect the community, but it was clear the tide had turned against her. No one came to her defense. In fact, several neighbors stepped closer to the farm owners, offering them supportive smiles and nods. Karen, realizing she was completely alone, finally fell silent. With a final glare at everyone around her, she turned sharply on her heel and stomped back to her house, slamming the door so hard behind her that it echoed down the street. The entire scene felt surreal, like something out of a reality TV show, the nosy neighbor finally facing real consequences for her endless meddling. People lingered for a while afterward, laughing quietly, exchanging stories about their own past run-ins with Karen, feeling a shared sense of vindication. For years, Karen had made life difficult for so many people in the neighborhood, hiding behind HOA rules and petty complaints. Now, for once, it was Karen who had been publicly embarrassed, and it was oddly satisfying to witness. In the days and weeks that followed, Karen was noticeably quieter. She no longer marched around the neighborhood with her clipboard, jotting down violations. She stopped sending angry letters to the HOA and no longer called emergency meetings over trivial matters like mailbox decorations or garden gnome placements. She avoided eye contact with neighbors and kept her head down whenever she went outside, which wasn't often. Her once frequent tirades at HOA meetings became a thing of the past. It was like a heavy cloud had lifted from the community and the atmosphere felt lighter, freer. Meanwhile, the little farm blossomed more than ever. Word spread quickly about what had happened, and the farm became something of a local celebrity. People from nearby neighborhoods started visiting, curious to see the place that had survived Karen's wrath. The young couple running the farm welcomed everyone warmly, offering tours, selling their fresh produce, and even starting small weekend workshops about sustainable gardening and animal care. Local media caught wind of the story too. A feel-good article was published in the town's newspaper, celebrating the farm as a beacon of community spirit and resilience. Photos of smiling children feeding goats and happy families picking fresh vegetables filled the pages, accompanied by a story about how the farm had brought the neighborhood closer together. Karen was, of course, not mentioned by name in the article, but everyone who had been there that day knew the full story. Whenever the topic came up at neighborhood gatherings, it was always accompanied by knowing smiles and suppressed chuckles. It became one of those legendary stories that would be retold for years. The day Karen's crusade backfired spectacularly and sweet karma was served right in front of everyone. The farm owners didn't just survive Karen's attack, they thrived because of it. They expanded their offerings, added a few more garden beds, and even adopted a few rescue animals, much to the delight of visiting families. They became beloved figures in the community, seen not just as farmers but as the heart of a small suburban revival of neighborliness and goodwill. And every time someone walked past Karen's house, which now seemed perpetually shuttered and silent, there was an unspoken sense of satisfaction. She had tried to tear down something beautiful, and in doing so, had only isolated herself while strengthening the bonds between everyone else. In the end, it wasn't just about the farm. It was about a neighborhood standing up against pettiness and fear, choosing instead to support something positive, something real. It was a reminder that sometimes the best way to defeat negativity isn't by fighting fire with fire, but by letting kindness, community, and a little bit of sweet karma do the work.